Have you ever been looked at like you were trash? Like you were a stain on someone's expensive silk carpet? Victoria stood in that cold Manhattan courtroom, trembling as her husband and his mother laughed. They thought they had won. They thought they were forcing a penniless gold digger to sign away her life for a measly $5,000. But they made one fatal mistake. They didn't check who really owned the building they were standing in. They didn't know that the signature they were demanding wasn't the surrender of a pauper. It was the unleash of the biggest billionaire empire in New York. And by the time the ink was dry, it was already too late. The air in the Superior Court of New York was stale, smelling of floor wax and old lies. For Victoria Calloway, it smelled like the end of a 3-year nightmare. She sat alone on the left side of the aisle. Her coat, a simple beige trench from a rack at Target, was buttoned to her chin, hiding the fact that she had lost 15 pounds in the last month. Her hands were folded in her lap, her knuckles white. She wasn't looking at the judge. She wasn't looking at the high ceilings or the American flag draped in the corner. She was looking at the man sitting at the opposite table. Preston Calloway. He looked impeccable. He was wearing a bespoke navy suit from Savile Row, one she knew cost more than her father's car, and his hair was gelled back in that slick, aggressive style that screamed Wall Street shark. He was whispering something to his lawyer, a blonde woman named Camilla Ford, who had a smile that looked like it was carved out of ice. Preston laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of a sound. He turned, catching Victoria's eye, and the cruelty in his gaze was so naked, so raw, it almost knocked the wind out of her. "Just sign the damn thing, Victoria," he mouthed, loud enough for his mother to hear. Ah, yes. Judith Calloway. Preston's mother sat in the front row of the gallery, dressed in Chanel from head to toe, looking like a vulture waiting for the carcass to stop twitching. Judith had never liked Victoria. From the moment Preston had brought her home, introducing her as a freelance graphic designer who liked painting and volunteer work, Judith had turned up her nose. To the Calloways, Victoria was a stray dog Preston had picked up out of pity, a nobody from the Midwest with no pedigree, no connections, and most importantly, no money. "Order!" Judge Harrison banged his gavel, looking bored. He shuffled the papers on his desk. "We are here for the final dissolution of marriage between Preston Arthur Calloway and Victoria Ann Calloway. I understand the parties have reached a settlement." Camilla Ford stood up, smoothing her skirt. "Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Calloway, out of the immense kindness of his heart, has agreed to provide Mrs. Calloway with a one-time severance payment of $5,000 to assist with her relocation." A titter of laughter ran through the few spectators, mostly Judith's bridge club friends, whom she had invited to witness the humiliation. $5,000. It was an insult. It wouldn't even cover the rent of a studio apartment in Brooklyn for 2 months. But the Calloways didn't care about fairness. This was about punishment. $5,000, the judge repeated, peering over his glasses at Victoria. "Mrs. Calloway, do you understand that by signing this, you waive all rights to alimony, spousal support, and any claim on the Calloway estate, including the marital home in the Hamptons and the penthouse on Fifth Avenue?" Victoria stood up slowly. Her legs felt heavy. "I understand, Your Honor." "She understands she's a leech, is what she understands," Judith whispered loudly. "Mrs. Calloway," the judge continued, ignoring the mother, "are you signing this under duress?" Victoria looked at Preston. He was smirking, tapping his expensive fountain pen against the mahogany table. Duress? No. This was extortion. 3 weeks ago, Preston had frozen her bank accounts. Then, he had threatened to release private journals she had written during her therapy sessions for anxiety. journals he had stolen from her nightstand. He promised to plaster them all over social media, to humiliate her so badly she'd never be able to show her face in New York again. "Just leave," he had said. "Sign the papers, take the cash, and disappear. Or I will destroy you." She took a deep breath. The silence in the room was deafening. "No, Your Honor," Victoria said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I am not under duress. I am ready to sign." Preston pumped his fist under the table. Camilla Ford rolled her eyes, pushing a thick document toward Victoria. "Page 4, bottom line," Camilla hissed as Victoria approached the bench. "Don't smudge it." Victoria picked up the pen. It was a cheap ballpoint the court provided. She looked down at the document. Final decree of divorce. It felt like a death warrant for the girl she used to be. The girl who believed in love. The girl who thought Preston Calloway was her Prince Charming, not a monster who would cheat on her with his own lawyer and then throw her onto the street. She hesitated. "Cold feet?" Preston sneered. "Don't push your luck, Tor. That $5,000 offer expires in 2 minutes. Victoria looked up. For the first time in months, the fog of depression lifted, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. She looked at Preston's arrogant face. She looked at Judith's hateful grin. She looked at the courtroom that felt so intimidating to the average person. They didn't know. They saw a freelance graphic designer in a Target coat. They didn't see the truth. They didn't know that Victoria Ann Calloway was a shell. They didn't know that her birth name was Victoria St. James. And they certainly didn't know that the St. James family quietly owned a controlling stake in Vanguard Capital, the private equity firm that had just approved a massive, life-saving loan to Preston's failing company, Calloway Tech. Victoria pressed the pen to the paper. "You want me gone?" she thought. "Fine. I'll go. But I'm taking the ladder with me." She signed her name. The scratch of the pen sounded like a match being struck. To understand why a woman worth billions was standing in a courtroom accepting a check for $5,000, you have to understand the burden of the name St. James. Victoria grew up in a world of private jets, security details, and fake friends. Her father, William St. James, was a titan of industry, a man who owned shipping lines, tech firms, and vast swathes of real estate across Europe and the Americas. By the time Victoria was 22, she had been proposed to 6 times. Every single one of them was after her trust fund. One suitor, a British earl, had actually sent her father a business proposal for the marriage before he even asked her out on a date. It broke her. She became paranoid. She couldn't trust a smile, a handshake, or a kiss. So, when she moved to New York at 24, she created a test. She legally dropped St. James from her daily usage, using her middle name. She rented a modest walk-up in the East Village. She drove a used Honda. She took a job as a junior graphic designer at a boutique agency, a job she got on her own merit, without her father making a call. And then she met Preston. It was raining, a cliché, perhaps, but true. She was struggling with a broken umbrella outside a coffee shop on West 4th Street, and Preston Calloway stopped. He wasn't a billionaire then. He was comfortable, the son of a moderately successful real estate developer, Judith, who was trying to launch his own tech startup. He offered her his umbrella. He bought her a coffee. He didn't ask, "Who is your father?" or "Where do you summer?" He asked what kind of art she liked. For 2 years it was magic. Preston was ambitious, stressed, and sometimes moody. But he seemed to love her. He loved the girl who clipped coupons. He loved the girl who preferred pizza on the couch to gala dinners. When he proposed with a modest ring, he said he had saved up for months to buy, Victoria cried. She finally felt safe. she decided she would tell him the truth about her money on their 5th anniversary. She wanted to build a life together first, to prove that they could make it on their own. That was the mistake. The rot started 6 months into the marriage. Preston's company, Callaway Tech, hit a wall. He needed capital. He became obsessed with status. He started bringing Victoria to high society events, but instead of being proud of her, he was embarrassed. "Can you not wear that dress?" he hissed at her before a charity gala at the Met. "It looks cheap. My investors are going to be there." "It's vintage, Preston. I like it," she had argued. "You look like a waitress," he snapped. Then came Judith. The mother-in-law from hell moved into their guest suite, temporarily, while her townhouse was being renovated. She never left. Judith sniffed out Victoria's lack of spending like a bloodhound. "Why doesn't she have better jewelry, Preston? Is her family poor? We can't have a Callaway married to a pauper. It looks bad for the brand." Slowly, the man who offered her an umbrella vanished. In his place was a man who saw his wife as a dead weight. The breaking point was the Vanguard deal. 3 months ago, Preston had come home drunk, ecstatic. "We did it, Tor," he shouted, popping a bottle of champagne. "Vanguard Capital, the big whales. They're looking at Callaway Tech for a Series B round. $50 million. If I get this, I'm made. I'll be on the cover of Forbes." Victoria had frozen. Vanguard Capital. That was her father's firm. Specifically, it was the firm her father had put her in charge of overseeing as the silent chairwoman of the board just before he retired last year. She was the one who had greenlit the audit on Callaway Tech. She had seen Preston's name on the docket and, out of love, had pushed the file to the top of the pile, instructing the board to give him a chance. She hadn't told Preston. She wanted him to feel he earned it. But that night, as Preston drank, the truth came out. "Of course," Preston slurred, pouring another glass. "I have to clean up my image. The partners at Vanguard. They're old money. Sophisticated. I can't have loose ends." He looked at Victoria with a cold, detached assessment. "Loose ends?" she whispered. "You don't fit, Victoria," he said, the alcohol stripping away his filter. "Look at you. You're small. You're content with being average. I'm going to be a billionaire. I need a wife who looks the part. Someone like Camilla." Camilla. His lawyer. Victoria felt her heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. "I'm filing for divorce in the morning," Preston said, turning his back on her. "Don't make it difficult. If you fight me, I'll bury you. I need this deal to go through, and I need to look single and focused." The next day, he served her the papers. He thought he was clearing the deck for his success. He didn't realize he was setting fire to the very bridge he was standing on. Back in the courtroom, Victoria watched the court clerk stamp the papers. Thump, thump, it was done. "Congratulations, Mr. Callaway," Camilla Ford beamed, touching Preston's arm intimately. "You are a free man." "And richer?" Judith cackled. "Now we can focus on the real money. The Vanguard meeting is at 2 p.m, Preston. Don't be late." Preston stood up, buttoning his jacket. He looked at Victoria one last time. She was still standing there, the pen in her hand. "Here," Preston said, pulling a check out of his pocket and flicking it onto the table. It slid across the wood and fell to the floor near her feet. "Buy yourself something nice. Maybe a personality." He laughed. Judith laughed. Camilla laughed. They turned and walked out of the courtroom, their footsteps echoing with the confidence of people who thought they owned the world. Victoria bent down. She picked up the check for $5,000. She looked at it, then she slowly tore it in half, then in quarters. She let the confetti pieces fall to the dirty floor. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. It had been on silent. There were 12 missed calls from the board of directors at Vanguard Capital. She dialed the number for the chief financial officer, Arthur Pendleton. "Mrs. St. James?" Arthur's voice was frantic. "Where are you? The meeting with Callaway Tech is in 2 hours. The team is waiting for your final signature on the $50 million transfer." Victoria walked toward the courtroom doors, her heels clicking with a rhythm that sounded like war drums. "I'm on my way, Arthur," she said, her voice dropping an octave, losing the tremble of the abused housewife and gaining the steel of the CEO she was born to be. "Prepare the boardroom. And Arthur?" "Yes, Ma'am?" "Cancel the check and print out a new contract. I have some amendments to make to the Callaway deal." She pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped out into the bright, blinding sunlight of Manhattan. The crying was over. The reign of Victoria St. James had just begun. The sidewalk outside the courthouse was crowded with people rushing to lunch, oblivious to the woman standing near the curb, holding a torn check in her mind. Victoria took a deep breath of the exhaust-filled air. It tasted like freedom. A sleek, black Rolls-Royce Phantom glided through the traffic, cutting off a yellow taxi with practiced aggression. It pulled up to the curb right in front of her. The rear door opened before the car even fully stopped. A man in a dark suit stepped out. He was 6'4", built like a linebacker, with a scar running through his left eyebrow. This was Alfred, the head of security for the St. James family, and the only father figure Victoria had relied on since her own father had retired to a vineyard in Tuscany. Ms. St. James, Alfred said, his voice a low rumble. He looked at her cheap coat with a frown. "Are you all right?" "I'm divorced, Alfred," Victoria said, sliding into the back seat. The interior smelled of Italian leather and lavender. It was a scent she hadn't allowed herself to enjoy in 3 years. "Then congratulations are in order," Alfred said, closing the door. He got into the driver's seat. "Where to? The penthouse?" "No," Victoria said, pulling off the beige coat and balling it up. "Go to the tower and call Chloe. Tell her to meet me in the underground garage with the garment bag. I have a 2 p.m. board meeting." Alfred met her eyes in the rearview mirror. A small, knowing smile played on his lips. "The Callaway meeting?" "The Callaway meeting," she confirmed. "Drive fast, Alfred. The wolves are already on their way." While the Rolls-Royce tore through the avenues of Manhattan, Preston Callaway was currently sitting in the back of an Uber Black with Judith and Camilla. "Can you believe the nerve of her?" Judith was saying, reapplying her red lipstick in a compact mirror. Wearing that rags-to-riches coat, she looked like a homeless person. I was half expecting her to ask the judge for spare change. Preston laughed, checking his watch. "Forget her, Mum. She's history. Think about today. $50 million. Vanguard is a tough nut to crack," Camilla warned, scrolling through files on her tablet. "Their due diligence is aggressive. They asked about the discrepancy in the Q3 marketing budget." "Creative accounting, Camilla." Preston waved his hand dismissively. "That's what I pay you for. Just dazzle them. Once we meet the chairman, I'll turn on the charm. Men like that love me. I remind them of their younger selves." "Actually," Camilla frowned, "the dossier says the chairman retired last year. There's a new acting chairperson. No name listed on the public site, just the St. James Family Trust." "Probably some trust fund kid," Preston scoffed. "Even better. I'll sell them the dream, take the check, and we'll be drinking crystal by sunset." The Uber pulled up to the Vanguard Tower. It was a monolith of glass and steel that pierced the sky, screaming power and exclusion. Preston stepped out, buttoning his suit jacket. He felt invincible. He had just shed 120 pounds of dead weight named Victoria, and now he was about to ascend to the throne of the tech world. They walked into the lobby. The ceilings were 40 feet high. The walls were lined with abstract art that cost more than Preston's entire company. "I'm here to see the board," Preston told the receptionist, leaning on the marble desk. "Preston Calloway, CEO of Calloway Tech. I'm expected." The receptionist, a young woman with sharp glasses, didn't look up from her screen immediately. "Name?" "I just said it." "Preston Calloway." She typed slowly. "Calloway. Calloway. Ah yes, 2:00 p.m. The boardroom is on the 80th floor. You have a 15-minute wait. Please take a seat." "A wait?" Judith bristled. "Do you know who he is? He's the future of this industry." "Everyone who walks through those doors is the future of something, ma'am," the receptionist said icily. "Please take a seat." Judith huffed, marching over to a leather sofa. "Rude. When you own this building, Preston, fire her first." Meanwhile, 40 floors below them in the private underground garage, Victoria was undergoing a metamorphosis. She stepped out of the Rolls-Royce. Chloe, her executive assistant, a brilliant girl with a photographic memory and a fierce loyalty to Victoria, was waiting with a garment bag and a makeup kit. "We have 10 minutes, Ms. St. James," Chloe said, unzipping the bag. Victoria stripped off the department store slacks and the polyester blouse she had worn to court. She stood in her silk undergarments for a moment, shivering in the cool air of the garage, shedding the skin of the victim. She stepped into a blood-red power suit by Alexander McQueen. It was tailored to perfection, sharp enough to cut glass. She slid her feet into black Louboutin heels, the red soles flashing like a warning signal. Chloe worked quickly, pinning Victoria's hair up into a severe, elegant chignon. She applied a coat of matte red lipstick, the same shade as the suit. Victoria looked at her reflection in the car window. The sad, mousy girl from the courtroom was gone. Staring back at her was a predator, a queen, a billionaire. "Here," Chloe said, handing her a pair of diamond stud earrings. "Your grandmother's." Victoria put them on. "Is the board assembled?" "Yes, Arthur is stalling them. He's sweating bullets, by the way. He hates conflict." "He won't have to do any fighting today," Victoria said, smoothing her lapels. "I'll handle the slaughter." She walked toward the private elevator that bypassed the lobby and went straight to the penthouse boardroom. "Let's go," Victoria said. "My ex-husband hates to be kept waiting." The boardroom on the 80th floor of Vanguard Tower was less a room and more a fortress of solitude. 3 walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic view of New York City, a view that made the cars below look like ants. In the center of the room sat a massive table made of black walnut. Around it sat the 7 members of the Vanguard Investment Board. They were serious men and women, veterans of Wall Street who had eaten companies larger than Calloway Tech for breakfast. Arthur Pendleton, the CFO, sat at the right hand of the empty chair at the head of the table. He was wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. Preston, Judith, and Camilla were seated on the opposite side. Preston was vibrating with impatience. They had been waiting for 20 minutes. "Is there a problem?" Preston asked, tapping his pen on the table. "My time is valuable, gentlemen. I have other investors lining up." "The chairwoman is concluding a prior engagement," Arthur said, his voice tight. "She will be with us shortly." "Chairwoman," Judith whispered to Preston. "A woman? Oh, good. Women are emotional. Just compliment her shoes, Preston. She'll melt." Preston smirked. "Got it." Camilla leaned in. "Arthur, while we wait, perhaps we can discuss the valuation cap on the—" "We wait for the chair," Arthur cut her off. He looked terrified. He kept glancing at the heavy double doors at the end of the room. Preston leaned back, putting his arm over the back of his chair. He looked around the room, soaking it in. Nice view. I could get used to this. You know, when Callaway Tech goes public, I'm thinking of buying a floor in this building. Maybe the one above this. One of the board members, a silver-haired man named George, looked at Preston with a mixture of pity and amusement. The top 10 floors are private residence, Mr. Callaway, occupied by the owner. Everything has a price, George, Preston winked. Just then, the double doors clicked. The sound was loud in the silent room. Everyone stopped moving. The doors swung open. Preston didn't turn around immediately. He wanted to play it cool. He checked his phone, feigning indifference. The click-clack of heels on the marble floor echoed. Click, clack, click, clack. It was a confident, rhythmic sound. The sound of someone who didn't just walk, but marched. Judith turned to look. Her eyes went wide. Her mouth dropped open. She made a choking sound, like a cat with a hairball. "What is it, Mother?" Preston asked, annoyed. He swiveled his chair around. Time seemed to stop. Victoria stood at the end of the table. The red McQueen suit blazed like a fire in the grey room. Her posture was erect, her chin high. She held a thick leather folder in one hand. But Preston's brain refused to process what he was seeing. He saw the face of his wife, his ex-wife. But the context was impossible. Victoria was poor. Victoria was crying in a Target coat an hour ago. Victoria was a mouse. This woman was a dragon. "Victoria!" Preston blurted out, standing up. A nervous laugh bubbled up in his throat. What are you doing here? Did you follow me?" He looked at the security guard standing by the door. "Excuse me, this woman is my ex-wife. She's clearly having a mental breakdown. She's stalking me. Please remove her." The security guard didn't move. He stared straight ahead. Victoria didn't speak. She walked slowly toward the head of the table. She didn't look at Preston. She looked through him. "Victoria, stop it!" Judith hissed, standing up too. "This is $1 billion business meeting, you embarrassing little gold digger. How did you even get past the lobby? Did you sleep with the janitor?" Camilla Ford looked from Victoria to Arthur Pendleton. She saw the way Arthur was standing up, bowing his head slightly in respect. Camilla's face went pale. She was the smart one. She realized it first. "Preston," Camilla whispered, tugging on his sleeve. "Preston, sit down. Shut up." "No." Preston shook her off. He stepped into Victoria's path. "I told you to sign the papers and disappear, Tor. You don't belong here. Look at you, playing dress-up. You spent that $5,000 already on a fake suit." Victoria stopped. She was inches from him. She smelled of expensive perfume and cold resolve. She finally looked at him. Her eyes were hard, void of the warmth he used to see. "Get out of my way, Mr. Callaway," she said. Her voice was calm, but it carried to every corner of the room. "Or what?" Preston sneered, stepping closer to intimidate her. "You'll cry? Or I'll have security throw you out the window," she said. She sidestepped him and walked to the head of the table. The empty chair. The throne. Arthur Pendleton rushed to pull the chair out for her. "Good afternoon, Madam Chairwoman," Arthur said, loud and clear. Victoria sat down. She placed her folder on the table and clasped her hands. "Thank you, Arthur," she said. Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. Preston stood frozen in the middle of the room, his hand half raised. He looked at Arthur. He looked at the board members, who were all looking at Victoria with deference. He looked at Judith, who had turned a shade of purple. "Chairwoman," Preston whispered. The word tasted like ash. "Sit down, Preston," Victoria said, opening the folder. "We have a lot to discuss. Specifically, The $50 million you're asking me for. Preston stumbled back to his chair. His legs felt like jelly. He collapsed into the seat. You, Judith stammered, pointing a shaking finger. You're the St. James Trust. Victoria St. James, Victoria corrected, not even looking at the old woman. My father is William St. James. I believe you've heard of him? He built this building. The color drained from Judith's face so fast she looked like a corpse. She had spent 3 years calling a billionaire heiress a pauper. She had treated the owner of the Vanguard Empire like a servant. Now, Victoria said, putting on a pair of reading glasses. She looked every inch the CEO. Let's look at the financials of Callaway Tech. She pulled out a document. I see here that you've listed your proprietary algorithm as your main asset, valued at $20 million, Victoria said, tracing a line with her finger. Yes, Preston managed to choke out. He was sweating profusely now. It's revolutionary. It's stolen, Victoria said flatly. She tossed a stapled packet across the table. It slid and hit Preston's hand. That is a patent filing from a developer in Silicon Valley named Eric Zhao. It seems your revolutionary code is a copy-paste of his open-source project from 2019. Vanguard's audit team found this in about 10 minutes. Did you think we wouldn't check? There must be a mistake, Camilla said, her voice trembling. We have rights to... You have nothing, Victoria interrupted. You have a lawsuit waiting to happen, and since Vanguard doesn't invest in thieves, this deal is dead. Dead? Preston stood up again, panic setting in. You can't do that. This is personal. You're doing this because I divorced you. Victoria took off her glasses and looked him in the eye. No, Preston. I'm doing this because you're a bad investment. You're reckless, you're arrogant, and you're a liar. The divorce? That was just you doing me a favor. She closed the folder with a snap. But, she continued, a cruel smile touching her lips, I am a businesswoman, and I see potential in the infrastructure of Callaway Tech, just not the leadership. She signaled to Arthur. Arthur slid a single piece of paper toward Preston. What is this? Preston asked. A term sheet, Victoria said. Vanguard is willing to acquire Callaway Tech. We will pay off your debts, which I know are substantial. We will prevent Eric Zhao from suing you into oblivion. Acquire? Preston read the paper. His eyes bulged. For $1. You want to buy my company for $1? It's a fair price. Victoria shrugged. Considering the company is worthless without the stolen code, and considering you have a balloon payment on your business loan due next week that you can't pay. Preston looked at his mother. Judith was slumped in her chair, defeated. He looked at Camilla. She was looking at the floor, distancing herself from the sinking ship. I won't sign it, Preston spat. I'll go to another firm. Go ahead, Victoria said, leaning back. But the moment you walk out that door, I release the audit report on the stolen code to the press. You'll be investigated by the SEC by tomorrow morning. You won't just be broke, Preston. You'll be in prison. Preston felt the room spinning. The walls of glass felt like they were closing in. He looked at the woman he had thrown away. The woman he had forced to sign a divorce decree for $5,000. She held his life in her manicured hands. $1, Preston whispered. And one more condition, Victoria added. What? The severance package, she said softly. I want my $5,000 back. The silence in the boardroom was heavy, pressing down on Preston's chest like a physical weight. He looked at the term sheet in front of him. Sale price, $1,000 US. His hand trembled as he reached for his pen, the same expensive Mont Blanc pen he had used to mock Victoria in divorce court less than 2 hours ago. Now, it felt like a lead weight. You can't be serious, Judith cried out, her voice shrill and breaking. Preston, don't sign that. We are Calloway's. We don't sell our legacy for $1. Shut up, mother, Preston roared, slamming his hand on the table. The veneer of the dutiful son finally cracked. Do you have $50 million? Do you have a way to stop a federal investigation? No, you just have debt and opinions. He looked back at Victoria. She was sipping a glass of sparkling water, watching him with the detached interest of a scientist observing a bug in a jar. If I sign this, Preston said, his voice raspy, you promise no SEC investigation? No press release about the stolen code? My word is my bond, Preston, Victoria said coolly. Unlike yours. Preston uncapped the pen. He felt like he was signing his own obituary. He scribbled his signature on the line. It was messy, jagged. Done, he whispered. Arthur Pendleton stepped forward and whisked the paper away instantly. The acquisition is effective immediately. Callaway Tech is now a subsidiary of Vanguard Capital. Great, Camilla Ford said, standing up and smoothing her skirt. She forced a bright, fake smile toward Victoria. Well, Ms. St. James, I look forward to working with you on the transition. As legal counsel for Callaway Tech, I have all the files ready for— Sit down, Ms. Ford, Victoria interrupted. She didn't even raise her voice. Camilla froze. Excuse me? You were legal counsel for Callaway Tech, Victoria corrected, but Vanguard has its own legal department. Effective immediately, your services are terminated. Camilla's jaw dropped. You can't just fire me. I have a contract. I have a severance clause. Victoria picked up another file from her stack. Actually, I was reviewing the expense reports for Callaway Tech during the due diligence phase. I noticed a significant amount of company funds, investor funds, were used for travel and entertainment. She tossed a few photos across the table. They were high-resolution images taken from a distance. They showed Preston and Camilla on a yacht in the Mediterranean. This trip was booked as a developer conference in expenses, Victoria said. But it looks remarkably like a romantic getaway. Using company funds for a personal affair is embezzlement, Ms. Ford. If you want to discuss your severance package, we can do it in front of the Bar Association Ethics Committee. Or you can walk out that door right now with nothing. Camilla looked at the photos. She looked at Preston, who was staring at the table, defeated. She grabbed her briefcase. She didn't say a word. She didn't even look at Preston. She turned and practically ran out of the boardroom. And then there were two, Victoria said, her gaze shifting to Judith. Judith shrank back into her chair. The older woman, usually so full of venom, looked small and frail. Victoria, Judith started, her voice shaking. I always knew you were special. I told Preston, didn't I? I said, she has a certain regal quality. Victoria laughed. It was a genuine laugh. But it was cold. Save it, Judith. You called me a leech. You made me sleep in the guest room when we visited your house because you said the master suite was for family only. You treated me like dirt because you thought I was poor. That is the only sin that matters in your world. Victoria stood up. The meeting was over. Security will escort you out, Victoria said. Oh, and Preston? One last thing. Preston looked up, his eyes red. The apartment on Fifth Avenue, Victoria said. The one you kicked me out of? The lease was in the company's name. Since Vanguard now owns the company, we own the apartment. You have 24 hours to vacate. I'd suggest you start packing. I hear the rental market in New Jersey is affordable this time of year. Victoria turned and walked toward the private elevator. She didn't look back as the security guards stepped forward to remove the trespassers from her building. As the elevator doors closed, she saw Preston put his head in his hands and weep. She felt nothing. No joy, no sadness, just the clean, sharp sensation of a tumor being removed. 6 months later, New York City was dressed in its winter best, covered in snow and twinkling lights, but the brightest lights were focused on the entrance of the Plaza Hotel. It was the night of the St. James Foundation Charity Gala. The paparazzi were in a frenzy. Flashbulbs popped like lightning storms as celebrities, politicians and tycoons walked the red carpet. "Victoria! Victoria! Over here!" A black limousine pulled up. The door opened and Victoria St. James stepped out. She was breathtaking. She wore a custom gown of midnight blue velvet, dripping with sapphires. She didn't look like the terrified divorcee from the courtroom anymore. She looked like the owner of the city. She smiled for the cameras, waving effortlessly. Next to her was Eric Zhao, the developer whose code Preston had stolen. Victoria hadn't just saved him from a lawsuit, she had hired him. He was now the CTO of the revamped Callaway Tech, now rebranded as Phoenix Systems, and he was a millionaire in his own right, thanks to her fair leadership. They walked inside the ballroom, which was decorated with white roses and crystal chandeliers. Victoria took the stage to a thunderous applause. She spoke about the new initiative her foundation was launching, a legal defense fund for women trapped in financially abusive marriages. "Financial abuse is invisible," Victoria told the hushed crowd. "It hides in bank accounts and legal threats. It silences women. I was silenced once. But never again." As the applause washed over her, she walked off stage and began mingling. "Excuse me, Ms. St. James?" A waiter holding a tray of champagne flutes had stopped in front of her. He was keeping his head down, his posture slumped. Victoria paused. She recognized the voice. She looked closely at the man. He was thinner. His hair was graying at the temples and needed a cut. There were dark circles under his eyes. "Preston?" she asked, genuinely surprised. He looked up. The shame in his eyes was excruciating. I didn't know you would be hosting," Preston stammered. "I'm working for the catering company. It's a temp job." The mighty Preston Callaway, the man who wanted to be on the cover of Forbes. He was serving champagne at his ex-wife's party. "I see," Victoria said calmly. She didn't mock him. She didn't sneer. "Tour, Victoria," Preston whispered, glancing around to make sure his supervisor wasn't watching. "I'm sorry. I know it's too late. But I'm sorry. I lost everything. Judith had a stroke when the bank took the house. She's in a state facility. Camilla is suing me. I have nothing." He looked at her with a desperate, pathetic hope. "Is there any chance? Could you help me? Just a job? Anything at the company? I know the systems. Please, I'm drowning." Victoria looked at the man she had once vowed to love forever. She remembered the umbrella in the rain. She searched her heart for any lingering spark of affection or anger. There was nothing. The man she loved had never existed. He was a character Preston had played until the money ran out. She reached into her clutch purse. Preston's eyes lit up. Was she going to give him a check? A business card? Victoria pulled out a $5 bill. She placed it gently on his tray, next to the half-empty glasses of champagne. "For the service," she said softly. "Keep the change." She turned around and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of her admirers, leaving him standing there with the cheap bill fluttering on his silver tray. 2 years had passed since the day the gavel fell in that cold courtroom. 2 years since Victoria St. James had stepped out of the shadow of a victim and ascended to the throne of a conqueror. In financial circles, she was no longer just an heiress. She was a predator. The Wall Street Journal had dubbed her the Iron Duchess. She had taken Vanguard Capital to heights her father had never dreamed of, diversifying into green energy, artificial intelligence, and biotechnology. She had tripled the family fortune. She was arguably the most powerful woman in New York City. But power, Victoria had learned, was a cold bedfellow. It was a rainy Tuesday in November, the kind of grey, weeping day that usually made Victoria retreat to her penthouse at 432 Park Avenue. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the city that looked like a circuit board from this height. Her phone buzzed on the Marble Island. It was a text from a British duke she had met at a fundraiser in Davos. "Dinner tonight? I know a charming spot in the West Village." Victoria swiped the notification away. She knew what dinner would be. He would talk about his polo ponies for 20 minutes, and then, inevitably, he would pivot to his cash flow issues regarding his ancestral estate. They were all the same. Since Preston, every man she met looked at her and saw a bank vault. They didn't see Victoria. They saw the St. James billions. She had built a fortress around her heart so high and so thick that she was beginning to wonder if she had accidentally walled herself in. "Alfred," she spoke into the intercom. "Yes, Miss St. James." "Cancel my afternoon meetings and bring the car around, not the Rolls, the Audi, and no security detail today." "Ms. St. James, protocol dictates I need to breathe, Alfred. I'm going to Chelsea, alone." 30 minutes later, Victoria was walking through the gallery district of Chelsea. She wore a simple trench coat, a scarf wrapped high around her face, and dark sunglasses. For the first time in months, she was anonymous. She wandered aimlessly until a small, unassuming gallery on 24th Street caught her eye. There was no gold lettering on the window, no pretentious doorman. Just a simple sign: Sterling Studios. She pushed the door open. A bell jingled, a quaint, old-fashioned sound. The gallery was empty of patrons, smelling of turpentine, linseed oil, and strong coffee. The walls were lined with large-scale canvases that were aggressive, chaotic, and hauntingly beautiful. They depicted storms, hurricanes, tornadoes, tsunamis, but in the center of each violent swirl was a singular, hyper-realistic object of peace: a child's toy, a flower, a sleeping bird. Victoria stopped in front of a massive canvas at the far end of the room. It was a painting of a shipwreck in a dark, raging ocean. But sitting on a piece of driftwood, untouched by the black waves, was a small, white paper crane. It hit her like a physical blow. The isolation, the chaos surrounding a fragile piece of hope. It was a mirror of her soul for the last 2 years. She stood there for a long time, the silence of the room wrapping around her. She didn't hear the footsteps approaching from the back office. "It's titled, 'The Paper Prayer,'" a voice said. Victoria jumped slightly, turning around. Standing there was a man who looked nothing like the polished sharks of Wall Street. He was tall, perhaps 35, wearing paint-splattered jeans and a charcoal flannel shirt, with the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms stained with charcoal dust. His hair was dark and unruly, and his eyes were a startling, intelligent grey. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Most people don't look at that one for very long. It makes them uncomfortable." "It's terrifying," Victoria admitted, her voice low. "And it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." The man smiled. It wasn't the practiced smile of a salesman. It was crooked, genuine, and reached his eyes. "I'm Leo Sterling. I'm the artist." "I'm Victoria," she said, hesitating. She waited for the spark of recognition. She waited for his eyes to widen, for him to realize he was talking to the owner of Vanguard Capital. But Leo just nodded. "Nice to meet you, Victoria. Do you like art, or are you just hiding from the rain?" Victoria blinked behind her sunglasses. He didn't know. "A bit of both," she said, removing her glasses. She looked back at the painting. How much is it? Leo chuckled, leaning against a pillar. Ah, the New York question. Straight to the transaction. Everything is a transaction, isn't it? Victoria said, her voice hardening slightly, a reflex from her boardroom battles. Name your price. I'll wire it today. Leo studied her. He looked at her expensive coat, her guarded posture, the invisible armor she wore. It's not for sale, Leo said simply. Victoria frowned. She turned to face him fully. Everything is for sale, Mr. Sterling. I can offer you 50,000, 100,000. You could offer me 1,000,000, Leo shrugged, tossing the rag onto a table. But I painted that on the day my father died. It's the only thing that kept me sane. It reminds me that even when the world is ending, you can still fold something beautiful out of the wreckage. That feeling? It's not for sale. Victoria was stunned. She had spent 2 years believing that money was the ultimate solvent, that it could dissolve any problem, open any door, and heal any wound. Preston had sold his soul for $1. Her lawyers bought silence. Her donations bought reputation. But this man in a flannel shirt was telling her no. You're a fool, Victoria said, though her voice lacked its usual bite. You could live comfortably for years with what I'm offering. I do live comfortably, Leo said, walking over to a small coffee station in the corner. I have a roof, I have my paint, and I have my peace. What else is there? He poured 2 mugs of coffee. He didn't ask if she wanted one, he just assumed. He walked back and held a mug out to her. Hazelnut, he said. It's cheap instant coffee, not what you're used to, I bet. But it's hot. Victoria looked at the mug. It was chipped at the rim. It said, World's okayest golfer on the side. She looked at Leo. He wasn't trying to impress her. He wasn't intimidated by her. He was just a human being, offering another human being a warm drink. Slowly, her hand reached out. She took the mug. The warmth seeped into her cold fingers. Thank you, she whispered. You look like you're carrying the weight of the world, Victoria, Leo said softly. He wasn't flirting. He was observing. You know, the paper crane in the painting? The trick isn't that it's strong. It's that it's light. It rides the waves because it doesn't try to fight them. Victoria felt a lump form in her throat. The tears she had suppressed during the divorce, during the hostile takeover of Callaway Tech, during the lonely nights in her penthouse, they threatened to spill over. I don't know how to be light, she confessed. I had to become iron to survive. Iron sinks, Leo said. Maybe it's time to try being paper again. He took a sip of his coffee, his grey eyes locking onto hers. Tell you what, Leo said, the painting stays on the wall, but if you want, you can come visit it. Admission is free, but the coffee will cost you. Victoria raised an eyebrow, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. Oh? And what is the price of the coffee? Conversation, Leo said. Real conversation. No business, no numbers. Tell me who you were before you became whoever you are now. Victoria looked around the quiet gallery. She thought of her schedule, her assistants, her billions. She thought of Preston serving champagne to people who didn't care if he lived or died. She looked at Leo Sterling, a man who found value in things that couldn't be bought. For the first time in a long time, Victoria St. James made a decision that had nothing to do with profit margins or risk assessment. She took a sip of the cheap hazelnut coffee. It tasted better than the vintage wine she drank alone in her ivory tower. I grew up in Connecticut, Victoria began, her voice steady and warm. And I used to want to be a painter, before I was told it wasn't practical. Leo smiled, leaning in to listen. Outside, the rain continued to pour, washing away the grime of the city. But inside, the storm had finally broken. Victoria had signed thousands of documents in her life, contracts, checks, mergers, and a divorce decree that had shattered her world. But standing there, with a chipped mug in her hand and a stranger who saw the truth in her eyes, she realized she was finally writing the only signature that mattered. She was signing off on her past, and for the first time, the future looked like a blank canvas. And that, my friends, is why you never judge a book by its cover, or a wife by her coat. Preston Calloway thought he was throwing away trash, but he was actually throwing away the treasure map. He let his greed blind him to the most valuable thing he had, a woman who loved him for him, not his money. In the end, Victoria didn't just get revenge, she got something better. She got justice, she got her identity back, and she found the strength to build an empire on her own terms. It's a reminder to all of us. Your value doesn't decrease based on someone's inability to see your worth. If they treat you like an option, help them narrow their choices by removing yourself from the equation. What would you have done if you were Victoria? Would you have given Preston a second chance at the gala? Or was the $5 tip the perfect mic drop? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of karma and comeback, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss a story. Remember, living well is the best revenge. I'll see you in the next video.